Colleagues, let's proceed to session 8, starting with a report of the Hoc Dues Committee. So you'll recall that the ISC has been functioning with an interim dues structure during its first 3-year period, and the governing board had been charged with presenting a new dues structure, a unified dues structure, for consideration at this General Assembly. The governing board set up an ad hoc dues committee in order to that this committee could guide the board in its thinking towards the development of a new and unified dues structure for the ISC. In the course of its work, I should say that the dues committee has held several consultations with members, and it has finalized its report, which is in your papers as document 8.1. I would like to now call on ISC Treasurer René van Kessel to report on the work of the dues committee and its recommendations. René, thank you. Over to you.
Good day or good night to you, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished members of ISC and guests. My name is René van Kessel, and I would like to guide you through the status report of the new ISC dues structure. And I refer to document 8.1. You may recall that in 2018, after the merger of ISSC and ICSU, the dues structure was frozen for 3 years. And that you, as a General Assembly, gave the governing board the instructions to develop a new system. And the governing board has appointed an ad hoc committee, and the names of the members of the committee can be found in the documents. I also wholeheartedly would like to acknowledge the important advice of Andrew Cleland, the former chief executive of the Royal Society of New Zealand, in the second stage of this process. And luckily, Andrew is also present during the meeting to take questions and to advise on further steps. The brief for the dues committee was to develop a single dues structure after the merger, and that also issues of affordable fees for low and middle income countries should be addressed, one of the important focal points of ISC as a community. And at least a similar income of ISC from dues should be aimed for, meaning at least 3 million euros per year. And the former ICSU structure was taken as a starting point and elaborated on. The status where we stand now as a governing board, having been advised by the ad hoc committee, is that a proposal has been developed based on the current membership base, being the full members, category 1, the unions and associations, and category 2, the national bodies, and the affiliated members, category 3, the other bodies. And the changes that have been proposed for category 1 is to add a band or bands to the system for the unions and associations, and adjust the band system for category 2, the national members, and adjust band number 6 and 9 to get a more even distribution of the system. For category 2, the national bodies also, multiple members per country share dues, and a fair system for that should be fleshed out with all the accompanying rules. For category 3, the affiliated members, no changes are being advised. And if these changes are being adopted, a gradual shift of 3 years is being recommended. Actually, we were planning to propose the document as tabled under this agenda item for discussion and adoption, but there were some challenges along the route. For instance, the implications of revising the band system for some of the members, which are quite invasive and severe. And for category 2 members, the national members, the unfairness of the gross domestic product as a denominator for the calculations is also something that needs to be looked into. The voting rights in situations of multiple members per country actually should be addressed in the statutes, and in the current statutes of ISC, this is not yet the case. And so this is a matter beyond the mandate for the Ad Hoc Dues Committee. And fourth, but not least, there is a discussion or a growing emerging discussion within ISC to expand the membership base to other categories. And what would be the implications for the dues systems? So these are all matters that make us reconsider the proposal. Where we stand currently in thinking of the category 1 members of the current membership base is to go from the current 4-band system, the A, B, C, D, to either a 5-band system or even a 13-band system. And I won't go into details of the numbers and can take questions when you have them. But the proposal boils down to the current 4-band system ranges from 0.5% to 10% of the income of the members, the unions and associations. And in the 5-band system, this would change to a range of 1.7 to about 7%. So slightly fairer. And even if you would come to a, for instance, 13-band system, the range would even more fairer between 3.5 to 4.5 percent of the income of the members. Category 2 members, the national bodies, there is a need for alignment of the 10-band system. If you look at the blue dots, which is the present dues system, you see that band 6 and band 9 are lower than the curve of the other bands. And the proposed dues in a revised system for category 2 would imply an increase in the dues for band 6 and band 9. Again, the numbers are in the document. I won't go into them now, but could take questions later. The considerations of the ad hoc committee, Andrew Cleland, myself, and the governing board are that for this category, the calculations are based on the gross domestic product over the 3 previous years. We have seriously looked into alternatives, also based on the feedback we got in the consultation meeting in June. But actually, as it stands now, the alternatives are not really an option. There was also the proposal for a cap in dues, the highest band at 600,000 euros and the lowest band one fixed at 1,400 euros. So no more than 600,000 and no less than 1,400,000. And the regional social science councils, the former members of ISSC, should be placed in band 1. In summary and in interim conclusions, achieving fairness in the current category 1 system would require a 13-band system, having a narrow range. But moving to a 5-band system would reduce inconsistency from 20:1 to 4:1. So maybe an interim step for consideration. For the category 2 members, the GDP of a country is a reasonable proxy for science intensity of a country. It's not a perfect proxy, but a reasonable one. And we have not found an alternative yet. In category 2, the band 6 and 9 are too low. They need to be higher, or wider changes need to be made. That's for consideration. And the issue of the surcharge of 10% of countries with 3 or more members, the multiple member situation, is still on the table and needs to be further looked into. And also in case of multiple members per country, what procedures in case of disputes also needs to be fleshed out, and this needs to be done in the statutes and the rules of procedures, and is beyond the mandate of the Dues Committee. So actually, the proposal is not to table this document as a proposal for adoption. And it's also implying to postpone the introduction because of the sensitivities and challenges for some of the members, and the connection between voting rights in the statutes and the dues systems, and the unclarity for multiple members per country, and the discussions on the revision of the membership base of ISSC with implications for the dues systems. So the status report is handed over to the next governing board for further action. And this also implies an extension of the current due structure. I'm ready, and I'm sure Andrew Cleland also is ready for further questions. And I thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much, Renee, for that report. Colleagues, we have time now for questions and comments from yourselves. I have, of course, Renee here, who will assist in fielding questions and comments. And then we also do have with us Andrew Cleland, whom Renee had introduced earlier. I'd like to take this opportunity, Andrew, to thank you for your work on the Hoc Dues Committee. Andrew, as you heard, is a former chief executive of the Royal Society Te Aparangi, New Zealand. So, colleagues, the floor is open for questions and comments. Let me, while we're waiting, just clarify or indicate that this is it's a report by the Ad Hoc Dues Committee. The report does come to you with the support of the governing board. The Ad Hoc Committee, of course, reported to the governing board. And it's a report for noting particularly a proposal on how to proceed, that is, with the new governing board with regard to, shall we say, a unified and integrated approach to a combination of developments that would include clarity and probably new directions with regard to categories of membership and the like. The complexities of voting that would go along with that, and then, of course, also the matter of a due structure in what would be a new arrangement. So that is what is in what has been presented. All right, I have a question from Anthony Watts of the International Union for Pure and Applied Biophysics. Anthony says, or asks, he says, there's a well-established table of percentage of GDP invested by governments in science. This is very evident when one examines the UK. So historically, the UK invests around 1.64% of GDP in science. And then furthermore, the average for the European Union of 27 countries is 2.4%. Has the committee thought of this approach to dues? That is, rather than GDP of the country, an approach based on the percentage of GDP invested in science by particular countries. Renee or Andrew, would you like to comment on that?
Would you like to start, Andrew?
Thank you very much, Renee. Look, I think any basis can be made to work as long as people feel that it's a fair basis. And if you look at the investment, that's investment in research where I think the ISC takes a much broader view of science as science applies widely across economies. It applies in the health sector, environmental sector, and so on. So it's not purely about the research investment, it's about science more generally. So if you can get reliable data, then you can make a system work on any basis. But I would be concerned to use research investment because I think it's a much narrower measure.
Indeed. Thanks very much, Andrew.
Thank you.
My version and via participate, and then I'll just delete all the ones that we have.
I've got a question from Ruth Cooper.
They need to be
Says, who asks, I note the conclusions on page 11 will still have different categories of members. If that is correct, I hope that the ISC will consider additional options with no categories. It also seems to infer that dues will be determined by the ISC rather than members choosing a band. I hope the ISC would consider this further also.
If you allow me, Daya. Thank you, Ruth. Actually, this is a matter for the next board to take on. And this will be taken into consideration because it's part of a larger discussion. But thank you for raising this, and we'll take a note of it.
Okay, thanks very much, Renee. I've got a question. I don't know, the questioner has not identified him or herself. Anyway, question goes, will the ISC bring the possibility of people joining as individuals? And if so, can you discuss the implications re dues? Let me just say, given that the first part of this question is about membership rather than about dues, this I would say is going to be part, no doubt, of the range of options that the incoming governing board will be considering with regard to modes of expanding its membership, including what is being asked in this question here about individuals as members. I don't think that we can comment at all on the merits or otherwise of such an approach. That is something which no doubt is going to occupy the minds of the incoming governing board. Likewise, of course, there would be implications for dues, and that would have to be part and parcel of those discussions in the anticipated integrated approach to a new structure. I kind of jumped in there, Renee, and I don't know if you've got anything you want to add to that. Okay.
We're on the same page.
Fine. There are right now no further questions on the chat box. I'll give it just a minute or two in case there's some last minute ones. So bear in mind, as I indicated 2 days ago, that there is a slight delay between the time a question comes in and it being transferred to my chat box. But it does seem to me that we have no further questions or comments. So, colleagues, if I could then propose remark that we have had a report. It's from the governing board, but a report of the Hoc Dues Committee, which has not proposed a new dues structure for reasons that have been set out in detail. The next step will be that of revisiting the issue of dues sometime over the forthcoming 3-year period. within the context of new membership categories and voting implications and the like. So this report is for noting, and I take it now as duly noted. Thank you very much for your questions and comments. Renee and Andrew, thank you very much also for your contributions to the work of the committee and here today. Colleagues, let's move on to session 9, which is firstly about the Treasurer's report for the period 2018 to 2021, and secondly, on the budget for the forthcoming 3-year period. So these are 2 items, and I will take them in turn, and we will need to have a vote on each of these items, and I propose that we do so at the conclusion of the second item. The session then is dedicated to our financial activities of the past 3 years and indicative budget for the next term. I will shortly call on Renee van Kessel, ISC Treasurer, to present her report for the previous 3 years. And what we will do at the appropriate time, and after we've taken questions, is we will abide by Statute 11G, which indicates that one of responsibilities of this assembly is to discharge the Vice President for Finance from liability, set the scale of annual dues to be paid by members, and approve the draft budgetary outlines as proposed by the Governing Board for the ensuing period. So it would make sense then for us to take Renee's report, the Treasurer's report, to take the presentation of the budget for the forthcoming period. And let me say at this point that presentation will be done by Peter Gluckman, President-elect. We'll take both of those, and then we will have time, certainly, for questions and comments. So firstly, Renee, could I please call on you to present the Treasurer's report? Thank you.
Good day, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished ISC members and guests. It's Renee van Kessel again, and on behalf of the Governing Board, I would like to talk you through the state of play in the financial matters of the International Science Council. And I refer to the document 9.1, the Treasurer's Report. I have 4 messages for you. I would like to acknowledge the support from the Committee for Finance and Fundraising, one of the 4 ISC standing committees. I guide you through the accounts of 2018 to 2020. I have some forecasts for the accounts of 2021 and some recommendations for the next phase of ISC. As for the Committee of Finance and Fundraising, you will find the composition on this slide and some more details on the ISC website. The members are experienced in matters of budgeting, auditing, resource mobilization, and risk management. And the committee has formal tasks laid down in the statutes and rules of procedure of ISC. As for the income and expenditure, an overview of the accounts can be found in the Activity and Achievement Report, document 2.1 in your folder, and which has also been discussed in previous meetings. As you may recall, after the merger of ICSU and ISSC, ISC started off with a sound financial basis. And despite the challenges of COVID affecting interactions with funders and prospect funders, the situation is still sound, with slightly declining income and expenditure. An exception is in 2018, there was still an income of 1 million euros from an executive program, Transformations for Sustainability, that was phased out after the change in mission of ISC. If you have any questions on these numbers, let me know after this presentation. And the breakdowns of the numbers can be found in the annual reports that can be downloaded from the ISC website. An example of such a detailed overview is this annual report of 2018, but also for later years, you can find them on the website. And if you have any questions, let me know. As far as income is concerned, we see a trend in the last years, a decline in income from external funds, which hopefully will pick up again from 2022 onwards. Now that there is a solid and convincing action plan and the world is opening up again after COVID, things may pick up. As far as expenditures over the last years is concerned, you can see that most of the funds are spent on science-related activities and accompanying human resources. And the details, again, can be found in the breakdowns in the annual reports. Looking at 2021, the books of 2021 end formally on December 31. And the accounts will be finalized in the second quarter of 2022. The forecast is that the income of 2021 will be around the amount that has been budgeted for. But expenditure is around 50% from what has been budgeted. And we assume and are convinced that this is due to the pandemic. Less activities have been able to have been pulled off. This most likely will result in a positive amount of 2 million euros, which are funds that can be spent in 2022 onwards. And because the exact amount will only be known early next year, this is an estimate. When we look at the prospect expenditure of 2021, you see that in particular the costs for governance and committee meetings, but also for the scientific activities and communication are lower than predicted. And this is due to an exceptional situation, which most likely will change for the better in the coming months, anticipating the adoption of the new ISC action plan and the decline of the pandemic. The ISC reserves are stable. Apart from the mandatory 1.5 million euros, around 2 million euros of general funds is available, which could be put to use for pivoting new activities. And up to the new board, obviously, on how to take this on. Matter for a slight concern is the percentage of arrears in due payments, which is slightly increasing. And the reason behind this, what else can it be besides the pandemic, needs to be investigated by the new governing board. Speaking of fundraising, fundraising also has been hampered in the last 2 years. ISC has leads and contacts beyond the major funders, the current major funders, National Science Foundation and SIDA. But there is some work to be done to match the mutual expectations and to result in new funds. It's a matter of attention for the new governing board. There are also plans for an endowment fund, which needs to be fleshed out with accompanying legal basis. And also the fundraising needs to be dovetailed with an in-depth discussion on the ISC membership base, which will be in the portfolio of the next governing board. And I also elaborated on this in the discussion on the dues structure. Summarizing for the next phase, the ISC has a financial basis that is sound, but obviously the new action plan asks for more. unspent reserves and dedicated funds from previous years could be used more optimal, and some plans are already made for this. And there is a need for the post-COVID stepping up in fundraising. We can discuss this maybe during the Q&A session. I thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, just let me know.
Colleagues, we now go on to the budget for the forthcoming 3-year period, 2022 to 24. I refer you to document 9.2 in your agenda papers. And I now invite Peter Gluckman, President-elect, to present some of the details of that budget. Peter, thanks very much. Over to you.
I'm just quickly going to show a few slides. And first of all, I want to thank Renee very much for all the effort she's done and the contributions of her and Sarah Marley, her deputy chair of the committee, to both the input in the last 3 years, but importantly, along with Heide Heckman and Arno in headquarters, to preparing a draft budget for the coming 3 years. We now have a rather comprehensive budget planning, monitoring framework and project management team in place, thanks to the efforts of the headquarters. But preparing an indicative budget is difficult for the reasons that Renee's alluded to. There's fluctuations in membership dues, which are likely to continue to fluctuate given the global economic uncertainties. We have to think about what the new membership dues structure might be. The pandemic issues continue, at least for the coming year in some way. And Renee's already introduced the absolute need for fundraising, particularly for additional unrestricted use. Fundraising for particular restricted uses is one thing, but the unrestricted that the board has deterministic role with is another. We also have now quite a tight review process over expenditure, as you would have seen from Renee's report. I'm showing when we've worked on the budget scenario for the next triennium, we've thought about two extremes. One is if we have no successful fundraising, how do we dip into the reserves, which will probably be larger, as Renee's indicated? And secondly, what would happen if we managed to significantly increase our fundraising? And we've given ourselves a target of raising at least 1.2 million euros over the next 3 years for non-restricted use by the ISC. 200,000 in next year, then 400, then 600 in the following year. It's important to recognise that at the moment, 73% of all our predicted funds come largely from membership dues, and that we have a very small income of unrestricted funds from non-membership sources, and this must increase. Our external funds, as Renee said, go up and down depending on what major contracts we can or partnerships we can develop. Looking ahead over the triennium, and we balanced it over the triennium simply because these swings and roundabouts and when projects start and stop don't fit within a calendar year easily. We expect that about 1.3 million euros will be spent over 3 years, so about 400,000 odd on governance, about 2.1 million per annum on science, on communications, membership and outreach, about 660,000 a year. And the basic management operations and infrastructure, rent, etc., so forth, will spend about 1.6 million euros a year. Just in explaining this, in looking at the income, we have an unrestricted income of about 10.6 million over the 3 years. External restricted income, which will be only available in 2022, is about 1.9 million, whereas we have about a similar amount of money assured, subject to no surprises, from the French government, the New Zealand government for CFRS, and from the National Research Foundation for Sustainability activities over the 3 years. That means, as I've indicated, that ideally we wish to raise 1.2 million over 3 years from unrestricted fundraising, which will allow us to use then reserves for new activities in conjunction with the membership. In terms of expenditure, about 9% of the predicted expenditure will be on governance, but half of that is actually for our regional focal point activities. They cost about 230,000 per annum. About 42% is for science activities, of which the bulk of which a lot is related to the staffing to support those activities, and then the membership and ISC-led projects, and about 20% on international projects with the UN. About 13% is spent on communications and member liaison, and about 36% of the expenditure budget is spent on administration, rent, which is reimbursed by the French government, and general expenses. In conclusion, our key risks over the next 3 years would be if we failed to get continued support from the French government, if we continue to have an over-reliance on membership dues, and that means the imperative of successful fundraising so that the reserves are used not for core purposes, but are used to extend our activities. Thank you very much, Daya.
Peter, thank you very much for that report. Colleagues, you've now had 2 reports, one for the previous 3 years and the second one looking ahead to the next 3 years. We will now take questions and comments on both of those reports. So the floor is open for questions from you in the chat box as the usual, but please, if you would like to speak, do indicate so, and we will arrange for you to do so. So while we're waiting, Peter, of course, what is built into the income for the forthcoming budget is the 2% increase, inflation-related increase in fees, which is the, if you like, the standard way in which we budget for income. So we will come back to that as part of the proposals for adoption by the Assembly. I do have something coming through. Just give me a moment. Okay, from Andrew Watts, the International Union for Pure and Applied Biophysics, who asks, he says, the IFC funding programs in the draft budget have a 0 expenditure in 2023 and 2024, despite a figure of 668,000 euros for 2022. So he's referring there to the funded programs. This is one of the expenditure lines that my union members would be most interested in hearing about. Can you explain the logic here, please? So Andrew's asking about the funded programs for which yes, Peter, please go ahead. Yeah.
The big difference is that the LIRA-related programs, which I think are the sum that we're referring to, are only earmarked to be completed by the end of 2022. Or in mid-2022, with a commitment to unrestricted funding being returned to CEDA. We've not been able to, at this stage, CEDA wants to comment, to extend that. And so we just have to be budget against the income that we have assured at this stage. That unfortunately supports the integrated research agenda in Africa, LIRA, and the transformation for sustainability funding, but we are there at the mercy of what CEDA agrees with ISC to do. That's what we have assured at this stage, and it would be imprudent to assume otherwise.
Yeah. Good. Thanks very much, Peter. Haida, we've got you here. So, colleagues, we do have Haida Huckman, the CEO, with us. Thank you very much for being with us. Let me just, reiterate thanks to you and Arno for the work that you've done on the budget. But you'd like to comment? Please go ahead.
Thank you. What Peter was saying is absolutely correct. I just wanted to add that this is the same also for the Transformations to Sustainability program. So both those funding programs, in agreement with CEDA, are terminated or terminating in 2022. That's why there's no expenditure forecast. What I do want to say, though, is that in agreement with CEDA, and we have supported CEDA in doing this, the intention is for the LIRA program to actually continue, but for it to be owned and developed and run in Africa by an African consortium. So in effect, ISC has worked with CEDA on this program, on its initiation and its first 5 years, and whatever follows will be taken forward by colleagues and organizations that we work with closely in Africa. We don't know the details of that yet, but that is something that I think we should feel proud of. Thank you, Daya.
Thanks very much, Haida. I've got at least two further questions. The first is from Narinda Mehra, who asks, what does the external fund primarily comprise? Has the governing board considered additional areas of income that still need to be explored, particularly for additional needs in the post-COVID science activities? So I presume that this, Narinda, you're referring to the fundraising activities or proposed activities. But Peter, let me ask you to respond in more detail.
Yes, we have three major assured sources of funding in the meantime, which are the French support of the rent for the building, that's from the French government, New Zealand government, which supports the CFRS quite significantly, directly and indirectly through the Royal Society Te Aparangi, and the National Research Foundation, which makes a very generous support for sustainability-related activities. Clearly, we want to build on these. Clearly, as I mentioned on the Members' Day, fundraising is related to profile building. Profile building is related to the profile that we have both within the scientific community and within the potential fundraising community. And I regard that as an absolute priority now that we have a well-established action plan, thanks to the leadership of Daya, and that we can now go out there with confidence in terms of seeking support. For example, we received support of $100,000 next year, specifically from UNDP, for the work we will do with them jointly on the Human Development Index and Human Development Report. So there are a number of activities being discussed. We're discussing with several other organisations partnerships where they will provide funding, but all this takes efforts from staff. It requires a commitment, which I think is a priority, into what you would call profile raising, friend raising, so we can then do fundraising.
Peter, thanks very much.
The other area I might just mention, which is one that I think merits a lot of consideration, is we have had several offers, and indeed, as in the case of the Royal Society of New Zealand with CFRS, where members have been willing to give additional support to ISC by way of in-kind or actual contributions from their own in their own organisation. And I think we'll be looking more and more to members to be able to contribute where they can, with expertise where they can, so that the headquarters can focus on those matters which need headquarters ready to put what leverage and capacity they have to purpose. And I'm grateful to one or two academies who've already approached us about areas they could work with us on.
Thanks very much for that, Peter. We have a question from Awang Mahmood. who asks, what is the possibility of support no longer forthcoming from the French government? So you'll recall from Peter's presentation and from René's that the contribution that we receive from the French government is really in two parts. One has to do with the rental of the building, headquarters, which is of the order of 260,000 euros. And then in addition, a grant from the government of 100,000 euros a year. And that we have received every year since the establishment of the ISC. We are extremely grateful to the French government for this funding. And I think that the fact that the funding has continued to come through, notwithstanding, there's COVID, but also all sorts of other complexities, no doubt, in France and within the French government system, the budgeting system and the like, certainly leaves me feeling confident of the continued support of the French government. But it's not something that we should take for granted. We are very grateful for that support, and it is important for us to be in communication with the French government, with the relevant ministries, about the work that the ISC is doing, and in a sense to indicate where that money is going. That's about as much that I can say on that question. I don't know whether Peter or René or Heidi would like to say anything further.
I'd like to say that we must be grateful to the French Academy for their strong support of us in this relationship. But like everything else in the world, a lot depends on relationships. And one of the key roles of the officers and the chief executive is to maintain these relationships, because at the end of the day, these things come down to individuals making individual decisions. And so relationship management is at the heart of the ISC being successful in so many ways, not just about money, but in terms of impact as well. And I think we've done very well over the first 3 years, and I hope that we can build on that starting point.
Good. Thanks very much, Peter. Got a question from Priscilla Grew, who's from IUGG, the International Union of Geodesy and Geophysics, who asks, with the ISC, the unions and associations in budget surplus situations due to COVID-caused spending reductions, will these surpluses be impediments to new fundraising? Would like to respond to that.
My answer is no. I think what they are is they allow us to have a more ambitious action plan, which has already been approved by the General Assembly. There are more things that we would like to do. There's, as I said, I think inserting ourselves into the multilateral system requires greater effort and resources. There are other things that the members and some of the networking sessions I've been in over the last few days have suggested we could give greater emphasis to. And so I think when we go out for fundraising, we can go out there saying we're not raising funds to just do what we do now, but so we can do more.
Yes, indeed. And of course, we will demonstrate prudent use of those surpluses when we make our various representations. Heidi, please.
I wanted to add, it's actually really interesting. In the case of external grants that we had received, of course, we've had to renegotiate allocation of those resources because we are spending less on meetings. This is allowing us to spend on other issues that I think are important in terms of the actual impact and outreach of some of our activities. So less on meetings and more on action for impact.
Good. That's prudent use. Good. Thank you, Heidi. Excellent. No further questions right now. Just to double check that I haven't missed anyone. No, I don't think so. All right, I'll I'll wait a moment, just in case. All right, colleagues. There don't appear to be further questions. Just a moment. Just a moment, let me just check. Oh, I beg your pardon. We do have a question. It's from Narinda Mehra, who asks, the G20 nations have created a very vibrant science S20 group with the objective of promoting scientific research and development across a whole lot of areas. Could the ISC consider developing a more complementary association with that organization, the S20 organization? Good question.
The short answer is yes, definitely, and we've already started that discussion in quite a significant way. But I would add to that, there are a number of other multilateral organizations in which we are working to build our relationship stronger. OECD, World Economic Forum, GESDA, a raft of them, and some of them are very early in discussions, some of them are more advanced in discussions. But when we think about the multilateral landscape, and the report that will be discussed tomorrow makes reference to this, we must think about a broader raft of organizations. I've also had some discussions about possible engagement also with the G7 group as well, which is also very influential in some of these matters. So it's not easy. This is all about relationships and building the relationship before one gets invited in the door. But I think we're on the path of building those relationships.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Narinda, for that question. Good. Let's just wait a moment again, colleagues. Okay, there appear to be no further questions in the chat, so last double check. Colleagues, I think we're in a position now. Thank you very much for your questions, comments. I hope that that the responses have helped to clarify any other concerns or points that were perhaps not absolutely clear in both of those reports. Thank you very much. So, as I indicated earlier, we have a job to do, the Assembly has a job to do here, in that, first of all, I have to ask you whether you adopt the Treasurer's report and discharge the Treasurer of liability. I'll come to the second part, which is about the budget and the due scale in a moment, but let's deal with that first. I would like us to, I'd like you to take a vote, to vote on this, and I would like us to do this by the quick poll that we used previously, for example, in regard to the appointment of the tellers and one or two other items. I'd like us to do that poll. Well, thank you, colleagues. The voting is completed, and the outcome is that we have 96% in favour, supporting adoption. We have 4% who have abstained, and we have 0% voting against. So this Assembly then has agreed to adoption of the Treasurer's report, and we've agreed to discharge the Treasurer of liability. Thank you very much. I would like now to go on to the second set of voting. We are dealing now, colleagues, with the ISC budget for the forthcoming period of 2022 to 24. And let me indicate that within that budget, we have made provision for a 2%, a maximum increase of 2% in the dues in years 2 and years 3 of that budget. Also, based on the earlier discussion around dues, the dues structure and levels will remain, and the budget income line reflects that particular situation. So that's what you've seen in the budget, and that is what will be happening with regard to dues over the forthcoming period. Colleagues, what I would like to do is, we've had some good questions, we've had some good responses. I've not detected any serious concerns, and so what I propose is that we vote, that I put the motion, the proposal to you, and that you vote via the quick poll, the poll that we've used, the format that we've used a moment ago for the Treasurer's report. So the voting is now open, and the question is, do you support adoption of the ISC budget for the forthcoming triennium, together with the dues scale that is proposed as part of that budget? In favour or not in favour or abstain? The voting begins right now, and I will I'll allocate around 2 minutes for that to take place. Thank you. Right, colleagues, thank you very much. So the voting has taken place, and the outcome is as follows. We have 88% in favour of adoption of the budget. We have 1% against, and we have 11% abstaining. So that motion carries. Thank you very much for your votes and for the discussion as well, and for your support for the budget for the forthcoming period. Thank you very much. Now, the next item on the agenda is really one that takes us back to the elections, with the announcement of the outcome of voting for the officers. We are not ready yet, so I believe we'll need another 6 minutes or thereabouts. So we'll have some music while we wait for the tellers to complete their work. Thank you.